I am now recording. The date is February 1st, 2018. It is 6 o'clock or 6:04, I guess. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of ITSE 2309, coming from the labs at Collin College in beautiful downtown Frisco. Let's see. Question is, when is what due? The modules 3 and 4 are officially due today. I told you I have a fairly soft policy on my deadlines. If you need an extra day, just go ahead and take it. It's not a problem. I will probably begin my grading tomorrow. Typically speaking, what I do with respect to grading is I will, after the due date, I will grade them for a week or so. Then I stop grading because I don't like going back and getting 1 or 2 from way back. So I stopped grading for a while. And before the end of the semester, though, I will go back and pick everything up. Okay. Let's see. As we go tonight, I will have my Canvas on. I will be able to see the inbox as I am pointing to now. And if you need to send me, if one of the participants out there, I see I have several, are interested in asking a question, go ahead and send me a message via Canvas. I will see it. The problem is everyone else is going to see it too, but we'll just deal with that. Okay, first thing, let's see, announcements. It's been pointed out to me that SQL Server 2016 only works on Windows 10. That is true. If you have an earlier version of Windows, you will need to download SQL Server, I recommend 2012. Now, SQL Server 2014 kind of works on both of them, but SQL Server 2012 is a more stable platform if you have Windows 7. I recommend SQL Server 2012 instead of 2014. I will get that into the installation instructions. And let's proceed here. Okay, I'm going to look at the modules, and you should have already done this. We're going to go into modules where it says Module 2. Let's look at Module 2 and some stuff on there. I'm going to specifically look into Module 5 where it says Create the Accounts Payable AP database. In Module 5, I will find a file called createap.sql. You should have already downloaded that. If you haven't, it's time to do so now. I'm going to open that, open a query. I'm going to say File, Open, and I'm going to open File, Open, File. It seems a little redundant. And let's see, I go to my downloads, wherever that got saved. I'm going to open createap.sql. It's a pretty good sized file. Don't know exactly how many rows it is. Oh, 750 rows, lines of code or so. Not particularly big. Okay. Now this file depends on the database AP_DB existing. If you are using this file in the Open Lab, okay, Open Lab users, Open Lab runs under what we call deep freeze, and in Open Lab everything goes away at midnight, which is not a good way to try to run a database class, but that's what we've got to deal with. So we will have to run this every time we sit down in the Open Lab to a new day. Okay, so we need to create that database. Now, line 6 creates that database. Creates it in SQL. Create database AP_DB. You don't have to do that every time on your own computer. You don't have to do it in here. But if you're using the Open Lab, we'll need to create it. Excuse me, it's line 4. Line 4, create database, AP. Now, we must choose the database we use. Every SQL program we write from now on will have this line in it, use AP_DB, or it might have use your default database, even if it's your default database, even if it will run without it. Okay, what happens is the system looks for a table that it can possibly use and grabs the first one it can find. But when you say use AP_DB, that means we're using that database. I see that I have already created that database. Therefore, when I run this program, it will create the tables that I need to use. So once I have it open, create AP, I will simply hit execute, and about 2 or 3 seconds later, all 750 lines have run, and I get the query executed successfully. I should get no errors. If I get an error, why? If I get an error, it's probably because we've misnamed that database. Now I need to make sure that I've created the tables. So I go over here to this guy. Open APDB, look at the tables, and I should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tables. These are the tables we will use in this class. Those are our working tables. If at any time you hose your database, which we will probably do, just go in and run that script again. It will recreate it from scratch. Later on in the class, we will be dealing with things that are time sensitive to when the database was created. So I'll say, find me everything that is due in the next 2 weeks. Well, if we haven't created the database in the last 2 weeks, it's not going to be the right time. So we'll run this script again from time to time as we please. Therefore, you can do anything you want to this database. All you have to do to put it back is just run the script. I'm not going to say anything, but excuse me. So it drops all the tables and takes care of that. Today, and I see I have a question from our viewing public. Ms. Ryan asks, when we create a file to turn in, do we use the database with our name attached to it or the generically named database? The generically named database, every database has a name. The name we will typically be using is AP_DB. The database with your name attached to it is what we call your default database. And that's the one that we set up. That's where you land when you come in and you log in. That is the database that you have. If you say create table foo, and you give it some fields, it's going to create that table in the database with your name on it because that is the default database. When we do files from now on to turn in, we will use AP_DB. Technically, in assignments for modules 3 and 4, we should have said use SW_Smith_DB. Technically, I should have said that. I didn't make everybody say that. I'm going to get a little bit stickier about it as we proceed. So from now on, each one will say use the database. So we're going to use use AP_DB. Semicolon. Okay. On module 3 and 4, I want you to use your default database. So on module 3 and 4, I should have said, to be technically correct, I should have said use SW_Smith_DB. But because it's your default database, that's fine. We're practicing creating tables. It will create the table in your default database. I really don't want to create scratch tables in AP_DB because that's our working database. That's our production database, if you like. Okay. The other one is where if I just want to create a table, it gets created by default in, mine would be SWSmith_DB. Send. Okay. So create that, run that file, and you should already have it. And excuse me, I'm gonna cough. Okay, we are tonight in Module 5. And I will send you this file. I am using Notepad++. You may use Notepad++. You may use Notepad. You may use the editor that is provided for you in SQL Server. So you can edit a query just fine in SQL Server. You can edit it, you can save it, and do anything you want to there. I personally like Notepad++. Okay, here when we turn in assignments, the first line of the assignment will have, well, the first line will have some type of a heading on it, and that heading must include your name. That's enough. If you want to add some other stuff, that's fine, you may. Many times that would be the date, for example, of when you, so many times they'll have a modification list of people who worked on this file. At least your name. Okay. Then who wrote it? After that, we will have the line on line 3, use AP_DB. Will be typical. And I want it to be that because I was explicit about name the database AP_DB. I don't want us all to have differently named databases. If we say use AP_DB and it gives you an error, the database is misnamed. Okay. Questions on that? Okay. I will be checking the inbox from time to time. Okay. Well. Module 5 starts off talking about what we call the select from where query. Select from where simply gives you back information from the database. Typically speaking, what the textbook says notwithstanding, the textbook might say some things that with which I disagree. A select from where statement, the objective of it is simply to return data. It is typically not used to format data, although it can do some rudimentary formatting. Typically speaking, this is a piece in between your database and the web application that is going to format the data finally for the user. This piece's job is just simply to go to the database and get me the data. It is not there to do any formatting. Now it can sort, it can filter the data, it can do lots of things to the data, but its job is not usually formatting the data. Therefore, I will typically not rename a field. I'm going to talk about that today, renaming a field in the query, unless I have to. There'll be times when I have to. but I don't do it just to show it to the user with a pretty name on it. I'll do that later. So for example, if it is vendor name all in one word, I'm not going to bother breaking it out into 2 words in the select from where query. Many times also called in the literature just the plain old SFW, select from where query, without any explanation. So it's a very common query. In fact, that's the most common one, select from where. I'm going to go back over to my notepad. I want, for some reason, I need all of the vendors, all of the vendor name who live in Wisconsin. Now, it's kind of an open question. If I ask you to return the vendor name and you return other information, is it wrong? What is your opinion? You don't know. And many times in computing, we will say, if you do something else, so if you're writing a program and that program's job is to calculate some value, and it does anything else, it fires a nuclear missile at Paris, that would be considered an error. In database, it is typically not considered an error if you return extra rows from your query, as long as you don't have to use other tables. Okay, so if everything I've got is right there in front of me and I want to just return it just to look at it, it's okay, as long as I return at least those things that are required and I didn't do any extra work. It's no extra work for the computer to show I said return the vendor name. I also returned in this query the vendor city and the vendor state. That's considered legal because they're both part of that table. So once I get to the table and I've got the record in front of me, I can show you the state and the city just as easily as not. And the information that you wanted is there. So assumably this piece of information, vendor name, is going up to the web application. From what table? What table is this in? Now this might become important now because we like to have our graphical user interface over here to see what we're doing, and this is why I do like it, to have it. What table is that in? Well, it's in the vendors table. What is in the vendors table? Let's look at the columns in it, and from the vendors table, I can see that the vendor ID is the primary key. This is not able to roll that up any larger, so we'll just have to live with this small font. Primary key is the vendor ID. You can look at it on your own screen. These are the others. I see vendor name is a varchar 50. They're all just varchar 50. And it can be null. That's what this means, null. Means it can be null. Now, this particular graphical user interface will not pick up a constraint that says not null. There is a graphical user interface in here that allows me to create tables, just like I did in Microsoft Access. In fact, SQL Server is just Access's big brother. And so I drive through this thing and I click, the little not null button on it. And basically this is just saying, did you click that button? If I have a constraint in here, and if I look down at the constraints, I see that I have I can look at them here. Up here, it thinks that the vendor address 1 can be null. Where it looks to me like there is a constraint on that, I'm not going to bother opening it. Usually when I write a table, I tend to constrain everything to null. And then later, if somebody comes along and says, wait a minute, we need you to relax that constraint, it's a whole lot easier to take it off than it is to put it on. Why do you think that is true? Question is, suppose I have a table and a field in that table, and I constrain it not null. Nothing in there can be null. And then later I say, oh, heck, we want this to be null. Maybe the person doesn't have an address yet. It's easy to take that off, and now I can allow it to be null because everything that is already in there will conform to the new constraint setup. If I allow nulls and then later find that I want to disallow nulls, and when I add that constraint later, I have to go back in and fix all of the fields that are null. Or I have non-conforming data in the table. I can just go ahead and allow that to happen, but that's not a good situation either. Okay, so we have our first, here is our first select from where query, select vendor name, vendor city, vendor state, from vendors where vendor state is equal to WI, which means Wisconsin. Now, one of the nice things about this is if I highlight a little piece of it, I highlight a query, a statement, and if I say execute, it will execute only that statement. So how many do I have? I only have one field in that whole, I think I've got 120 or 130 of them in there. I only have one of them that's in Wisconsin. That's fine. And I see this showing down here. Now, I won't always see this in a graphical user. You can also set it up where you run it in a little command window, a DOS window, and you see your output in that DOS window. Yes, you can see it that way. I've tried it both ways. I like this way fairly well. It shows us the information, but it's not really formatted in any way. The output of an SQL query is a table. You say that again. The output of a SFW query is a table. This particular table has one row in it and 3 columns. Okay. It may have other rows. It might not have any rows. An SFW query is not correct or incorrect based on how many rows it prints. I will sometimes tell you, I got 30 rows from this query. That means that from my data, when I ran it against my data set, I received 30 rows. Your data may be different. You might have changed your data. You can change your data if you want to. It's none of my business. In that case, you might receive different rows. If you changed Madison, Wisconsin to Madison, Colorado, or wherever that is, then you're not going to return any rows. Okay. If you've added more from Wisconsin, as you may, if you choose to, then you're going to return more than one row. You may do that. It's not right or wrong based on the number of rows. I'm not going to see your data. I will see it run against my data. And I will typically refresh my data set before I start because I change it from time to time. If I want to test something about your code, I will go in and put in a row that says Frisco, Wisconsin. Okay. From that, then I will return 2 rows and on my data set. So the select from where query. You're free to edit it here. You can edit it and save it in this window, or you can edit it in a different window. I like Notepad++ because if I say save, then I go over to Notepad, it says, hey, wait a minute, somebody's changed this. Yes, I want to reload. Notice that it reflects the changes. So they're pretty well linked. Just plain Notepad doesn't do that. If I save it in Notepad and go back over to SQL Server, to the Server Management Studio, it will say, do you want to reload? Your answer is yes, you typically do. Questions? Well, I've defined the idea equals. Anytime I talk about equals, is equal to, there are 5 others that are there, and that is what? Less than, greater than, not equal to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, right? There are 6 relational operators, and we have all 6 of them. Pretty much have to have them. Questions? Let's see, greater than works. Anybody, any misunderstandings on that? Select vendor name, default terms ID, that is an integer. It runs 1 through 5. That's just a coded terms ID, and we'll see that later. From vendors, where default terms ID is less than 4. I can highlight. One thing to watch out for is don't make sure you haven't forgotten something. For example, if I highlight like that, what's wrong with that picture? I'm missing a piece of it. If I try to, well, okay, I need to be over in this one. I can't execute over, I cannot execute from Notepad++. When I try to execute this, I'm going to get an error message because I'm trying to execute half of a word. And so that's not going to work. Whenever you execute it, you have to select the whole thing. Okay, and I say execute. And there are all of them less than 4. I should not see any 4s in there. I can scroll down through it. By the way, when you turn in an assignment to me, I would like for you to just don't select anything, say execute. Something didn't work. $138. Oh, yeah, this doesn't work. This is a mistake. When you say execute, it should run. Everything runs, and it tells me that I returned all of them together was 1,402 rows. I will sometimes tell you how many rows I'm sort of expecting. There is some variance allowed many times. The way you write a query, the nuances of what you say will change the number of rows you return. So sometimes the order of things can affect an SQL query, but it will all run together. So please don't comment out your queries. Do not worry about these red squiggly lines. Don't worry about them. I'm not sure why I'm seeing them. They mean nothing. Invalid column name, vendor phone. It's not an invalid column name, and I don't know. There is a way to turn them off. I haven't put much effort into it, so I'm just gonna let them stay there. Wisconsin, less than 4. We've done that. Greater than or equal to 3. What would this return? All the vendor IDs that are 3 or 4 or 5. I've got that. That's what I've got in there. Now it's not going to cut it off at 5. If there are any in there that are 6, Let's see what there are just for giggles. Here's one that's 33. That, by the way, is an invalid datum. I put it in there because it's invalid. And then later, when we get to another one, I'm going to say, hey, go find any that are invalid. And we'll know what that means when we get to the next module. They should all be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, I believe. But there's one that isn't correct. We're not going to worry about that in this module. It's greater than 3. It's part of the output. Questions? Don't see any messages. Greater than 4. No, greater than or equal to 3. Same thing, greater than 4. Less than 4. This is greater than or equal to 3. Okay. Not equal to. Not equal to in SQL uses what we call the diamond inequality. I guess one would read that less than or greater than. Okay. That is commonly used in programming. You see it used all over the country. That it's the diamond syntax, we call it. That is the default syntax for SQL. That is the preferred syntax. It works on all versions of SQL. It is true that where do we get that one? Exclamation point equal. Where? It means not equal to, from C, C++, also Java, also Python. Okay, it's used a lot also. So SQL finally said, that's what everybody wants to do. We're going to go ahead and put that in there. In my opinion, it is preferable to use the diamond inequality. But if you use the exclamation point equal, oh well, it's part of the SQL language today. May not run on older versions. So if you go back before 2005, it might not run. But then that's the Stone Ages as far as computing goes. Questions? This one, where it's not equal to 1. Save. Do we want to reload? The answer is yes. Highlight. Execute. So we should not see any 1s in there. We'll see everything else. We should see 33 down here someplace. Yeah, I see it. If I had any negative 1s in there, I'd see those too. 0, I'd see that also. But I would not see a 1. Okay. Questions at this point? I will give you this file. What does it mean to be between 1 and 4? How many numbers are between 1 and 4? Are we talking about 2 and 3? Could I be talking about 1, 2, 3, and 4? Is 1 between 1 and 4? What about 4? Is that between 1 and 4? And while we're at it, if you talk to a computer scientist, I mean a theoretical computer scientist, such as me, a C programmer, for example, and you say to dimension an array from 1 to 4, you typically mean, or count from 1 to 4 or something like that, that computer scientist is going to interpret that as including the first one, but not the last one. So if you said count from 1 to 4, and you were a computer scientist, you would say 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then how many would he or she count would be take the upper bound, subtract the lower bound, and that 4 minus 1 is 3. You're going to have 3 numbers in that range. But the world isn't populated with computer scientists. What does the average person mean when you say between 1 and 4? Okay, 2 and 3 maybe. And that's probably true. We have to know what we will see when we say between 1 and 4. Therefore, I'm going to tell you what you will see when you say between A and B. 1 and 4, let's say. You will see 1, 2 and 3, obviously, and you will see 4. Let's test it. Between 1 and 4, when I execute that, notice that I see 1, and notice that I'm seeing 4s. There's a 4. I see 1 and I see 4. That is the way betweenness works. I do not like that particularly. I do not care for that. But that's what it does. You mean include the beginning point, and whether you mean it or not, the statement means include the beginning point and include the ending point. Questions? Is there an alternative? Oh, there's a good question. I like that one. Is there a way to get around it? And that's better than having a straight man, because I am just about to tell you that there is an alternative. And here is the alternative. Selecting the same fields from vendors where terms ID is greater than or equal to 1 and default terms ID is less than or equal to 4. That is the same statement. But now notice that I have control over it. If I want to include the 4, I can. If I don't want to include the 4, I don't have to. I can have it just pure betweenness by if I get rid of the equal and this equal, I am strictly between. I will get 2 and 3 only. If I put less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, I will include those endpoints. I can, half of it, I can take the beginning, but not the end. So I have a lot more control over it this way. This is this is Dr. Smith's preferred way to do betweenness. When I ask you on a quiz or a test to find the default terms ID between 1 and 4, I will tell you, do I mean including the endpoints or not? If you write it as a between statement, for example, if I said between 1 and 4, but not including 4, then you would have to say between 1 and 3. But you could say greater than or equal to 1 and less than 4. So there's you have a lot more leeway if you do it that way. How's my time? We'll take a break in just a second. Well, while we're talking about the and, notice that I got ands and ors. I'm not going to talk about the order by right now. I'm just going to talk about this. By the way, if I highlight this piece of it right there, it will run. It will run without that last line. SQL Server does not require a semicolon, but Dr. Smith does. We understand each other. SQL Server will let you get away without a semicolon. I will not, and most platforms will not. This particular environment that we're in right here, this Server Management Studio. If we're running here, it will put the semicolon on there for you. I want you to put semicolons where they are required. Pues claro. Are we understood on that? I'm going to take off on a couple of little items now. First one is I want to see you select the database that you're going to use. Here, I want to see you use AP_DB. I want to see your name. If you don't have a name, I'm going to take a point off. If you don't have this line right here, use APDB as the next executable line. I'm going to take a point off. It is considered good if you have no blank lines inside of an SQL statement. SQL Server doesn't care. I'm going to be saying, I'll be writing little memos to you if you put blank lines in there. Not every database product will accept them. SQL Server will. So if I put a blank line in here, this blank line right there would not work in many products. It will work in SQL Server. So if I run this, it will run just fine. But in many products, in many platforms, it will not. If you want to put a blank line anyway, put a -- comment on that line. Now it's legal. As far as lines 10, 11, and 13, don't worry about them. Use as many as you want. It's typically considered poor form to have a whole lot of real estate in there. Most of the time, programmers will tend to put a visual separator. That is legal, and I think a good practice. I want you to pay attention to the format of your program. Right now, that's all I'm going to ask for. Pay attention to your format. In SQL, you can format it any way you want. All of that thing could have gone on one line just fine. It could have all gone on separate lines. Every word on a separate line. Yes, it would have worked. I would not have been happy. So I'm going to demonstrate for you what I think is a good SQL format, and I would like for you to start taking that into consideration. I was in the other class and I was demonstrating, for example, see how the ones that are turning blue, I am putting them in all uppercase. I just chose to do that. Those are reserved words. The others, I use a mixture of uppercase, lowercase, or all lowercase if it pleases me. I had a student say, well, do I have to do that? And I said, well, I recommend it. And then he asked me, are you going to take points off? I said, he or she. I said, well, I probably will. Kind of, oh boy. Well, how many points? He didn't want to go back and change his code. So pay attention to your format. I will be making other formatting suggestions. So I tend to make suggestions here. So don't worry about it a whole lot. The other thing that will happen is when you turn your code in and it comes across to me, sometimes it won't look exactly like the way that you did it. If you increase your font or something, it'll make some changes to it. I'm not worried about that. Okay. Other thing is I'm fussy about is semicolons. I want to see semicolons where they are used at the end of each statement. Okay, here we are, vendor city default terms ID from vendors, where vendor state is CA, which is California, and default terms ID is greater than or equal to 2. What does and mean? Okay, both of them have to be true. Are we okay with that? An and statement is only true when both sides of it are true. If you prefer that. Most of the time students don't have a problem with that. So I would see California if and only if the default terms ID are true. Let's add vendor state. So everything has to be California. And this one has to be greater than 2. Let's change it and make it be equal to 2. Now I only see default terms ID of 2, and it also has to be in California. Okay, I've added in the order by. Okay, order by is a sort. And we can put that anywhere we want. We can put it into anything. I can order by any field in the table. Any field in the table. I cannot order by a field in another table. That doesn't make any sense. But if the field is in the table, I can use it. It does not have to be part of the output. So if I wanted to order by zip code, I could have done that just as easily, even though I can't see the zip code to confirm that it is ordered by the zip code. Okay. Questions? Question is, how is it ordered? Is it up or down? How are those ordered? Fresno, Los Angeles, Pasadena, Selma. Alphabetically, up or down? Alphabetically ascending. Okay. The default is ascending. Many times I can say that. We don't typically say ascending. That is always the default. Put them in alphabetical order. What do I want to see first? A. But maybe I want it differently. I can specify descending, D-E-S-C. If I say D-E-S-C and I run that, now notice I see them in reverse order. So typically, you may, of course, say ASC. It's perfectly legal. If you say it, I won't have a bit of problem with it. You won't get any comments from me. You can say it. If you don't say it, and I say in ascending order, I say print in ascending order, and you just don't say anything, I won't give you any comments either. That's what will happen. If you just say order by a field name, then it will order by that field name. Are we ready to take a break? It is about, I see it is 6:53. I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to check my, I see I have no comments from anyone. I'm going to pause recording. Resuming recording. And let's see, I have no comments. Okay, we were talking about order by. Order by is just appended. It is in this order. Select from where, order by. You don't get to change that ordering of the query. It has to be select from where. If you have an order by, then it's on the back. By the way, you don't have to have a where. If you say select something from vendors, you're going to see all, I believe it's 122 rows. So it won't be, if I just say select vendor city terms ID from vendors or anything from vendors, if I execute that, I see 122 rows returned. So if I don't say where, I see everything in the table. So you don't have to have a where, you don't have to have an order by. If you don't have an order by, there is no order applied. Now, that said, there has to be an order. What order do you see it in? You see it ordered by the primary key. Even though we say there is no order, a table is ordered by the primary key. However, you can't count on that to be true. So if you want it ordered, you have to say it's ordered, even though when I look at it, if I say order by, I will always see it ordered ascending, unless I say descending. Now, you can count on that. But you cannot count on its ordering it by the primary key unless you say order by vendor ID. It will be, because it's not going to change it typically. But what if it does? It can, so you can't stake your life on it. If you say order by vendor ID, it will be ordered by the vendor ID. Enough of that. Quite possible to say two of them. Okay, does not have to be in the select. I can order by zip code even if the zip code isn't there. And I can also order by two fields, order by vendor city, vendor zip code. So in this case, I will sort by the city first. So I would see Abilene and then Alpine and then Frisco. And within that, it will be sorted by vendor zip code. So all of Abilene will come together, all of Alpine will come together because those are the cities, all of Frisco will come together. And within that, then it will be sorted by zip code. If I switch them around, I will sort by zip code, and then within the zip codes, I will sort by city. However, all cities should be constant within a zip code, but it doesn't matter. If I change, it shouldn't change them around. Questions on that? I can order by as many fields as I want to. Sometimes I'll say sort. I try to say order by. The word sort is not part of SQL Server, so it's order by in SQL. So this is pure SQL. If you put this into any SQL platform, including Access, should run just fine. Oracle, no problem. The only thing that the use statement, the only statement that is not pure SQL is use the database name, because database names tend not to be consistent across databases. So that use command is not pure SQL. Everything else in here is pure SQL. I will try always to stay in that. If I had a go statement in here, what does go mean? I can add it in here. Go. Typically, Go does not have a semicolon on it. Go says, this breaks into two different programs now. The first program executes completely. When it hits this line 85, when it hits Go, it stops, makes sure everything up above that has completed. Then start over, start a new program, and execute that. And just if all you're doing is select from where queries, it doesn't matter. Our textbook uses it sometimes, our textbook doesn't. That is not pure SQL. That is SQL Server only. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that. There will be some places as we get towards the end of the class where you have to have it. Right now it's optional. Just don't put it. It makes it easier. You don't have to type it. Okay, but that's what it is. Okay. Let's look at vendor phone. Select vendor phone. What happens if a vendor does not have a vendor phone? Let's find out. What happens to these guys that don't have a phone? Where do they end up? Where? At the beginning. I think that it will not matter even if I say descending. That might make a liar out of me. You might make a liar out of me right here. I don't know, but I am expecting them to come at the beginning, even if I say descending. I hope I'm right. I'm not going to promise you that. No, apparently I'm not, because that puts them at the end. Okay, I'm wrong. I was expecting them always to come at the beginning. Okay, so null comes first. Null is considered to be the least of everything when you sort. But it really makes no difference. It really makes no sense to say order by something that's null. Okay. Null does not make any sense to talk about less than, greater than, equal to. But it has to put it someplace, because I told it to select all of the vendor phones, but some of them are null. So it has to show you that N-U-L-L. Database products will tend to differ on this, but nulls are tricky. Now, suppose I wanted to say I don't want to see phones that don't have, let's see, what's my next one? Okay, I'm going to leave it equal. I don't know what it'll do with not equal. Where it equals null. Now, what does that little equal sign mean? It means is the same thing as. Okay. But null is not a thing. Null is nothing. Therefore, it does not make sense to try to say, is it equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, null. I think, I'm pretty sure if I say is equal to null, when I say, I know that I have 22 null rows, but when I try to execute this, I get no rows at all, because equality doesn't work. I'm kind of curious. I want to see how this particular platform treats not equal to null. I'm a little curious. Again, I get no rows at all. Greater than null, no rows. Less than null, no rows. That's what I was expecting, but it threw me a curve a minute ago on null, so I'm not going to say one way or the other what I'm expecting. Okay, so if I try to say equal to, not equal to, it will always be false. How do I write it? This is the way we test for null. We use the word is. Greater than, less than make no sense at all. It's just is. It either is null, or I could also say is not null would also work. I could put the not in front and say where not vendor phone is null. Typically, you'll see it written vendor phone is not null. Either one of them would work. Okay. So I only want to see it is null. Usually I probably don't want to see 22 null statements. I probably don't know how many I've got. I probably am more interested in the names or the vendor ID. So, okay, vendor name. So this is going to show me, I believe, 25 rows that have no phone number. I can show you the phone number, but all I'm going to see is null. So these guys The Register of Copyrights is null. Oh well. Questions. Is null. Okay. Or is not null. Never equals null, never not equals null, never is greater than null, less than null. Is your car newer to, older than, equal to the age of my car if I don't own a car? Makes no sense. Null does not equal null. You get nothing. Questions? Select from where query that eliminates duplicates. If I just said select vendor states from vendors, well, I'm going to get a lot of vendor states. I see a lot of California. These guys, I'll bet I can tell you what state these guys live in, our textbook authors. Somebody wishes to communicate with me. Let me see if it's my wife. If it is, I have to take it. Nope. She who must be obeyed, I have to answer the phone. It's not her. Okay, notice that if I were to do order by state, I'd see lots of Californias. In fact, I can even tell you what city they live in by looking at the data, see if you can tell me what city they live in. That's the one you expect, the one where most of the data come from. So I have lots of Californias. If I want to eliminate these guys and only, I only want to see, I have at least one from that state. And sometimes I'm interested in how many different states do I have. So if I want to do that, I say select distinct. Somebody sent me them. Okay. Distinct, I have 22 different cities. States. Thank you. States. Okay. Questions? Distinct. Back in the old days of SQL, we used the word unique. That has been superseded. That's no longer in use, and we should use the term distinct. You will see old SQL that uses unique instead of distinct. We want to say distinct. Questions? Renaming columns. I can give a column an alias in the output. I do not typically do this unless I have to. I'm going to get to where I have to here in just a second. But I'm allowed to rename it using the keyword as. The keyword as is optional, but not in this class. I'm going to point to some things where we don't have to say it. If I don't put a comma, remember up here when I wanted to return multiple rows, I put commas between them. Commas required. If I do not put a comma, it will rename the column, but don't do that. Use the keyword as. Select vendor name as, my vendor name, comma, next field, as, whatever name you want it to be known by in the output. Now, this is not particularly useful because I pointed out at the beginning that the output of an SQL query is typically coming to me, and I'm typically passing it up to probably a web application or something else. I'm going to process it further. Typically speaking, the output from an SQL query is not the final output that I want. It could be. I could be writing SQL just to see what the answer is to a question. And that's true. You know, my boss asked me, how many different states are represented in our database? And I would answer whatever it was, 22, I think, or something like that. Okay. But most of the time you don't. So most of the time you really don't care about renaming columns unless I ask you to on a test, just because it's required to do that. So this is the way you do it. Vendor name, this one changes names to, instead of vendor name, it's now named in the output, my vendor name. Okay, whoopee. Or vendor phone is null. How about null vendor or null phone vendors, no phone vendors, or something like that. Now, it is possible to name a column with a space in it. I do not recommend doing this because there's no particular reason I need to. I don't care whether it has a space in it or not, and it just gives me a lot of trouble later down the road. So I recommend that you not put spaces in the output unless for some strange reason you have to. Don't know why that would be, because you can always put spaces in it at a higher level in the processing. So as you take these data and go up into your web page, you're free to do anything you want to with those names. So a web programmer isn't going to blink an eye at putting a space in there. If that's what they want to do, they can do it. I don't need to put spaces in my output. I can name it fee, fi, fo, and fum if I want to. Typically speaking, I'm going to keep the same name it comes to me from the table with and not change it, except when I have to. Question, I can. If I put a space in it or something weird in it, then I have to use the square brackets. Sometimes you will see applications that will put square brackets on it anyway. Yeah. There's nothing that says a square bracket would be wrong. If you just put it on everything, I guess it's okay. We don't need it. So if I don't need it, I don't type it. So if I put square brackets on that, it would not be wrong. They're not needed. Here, if I do not have these, it would be wrong. Questions? Because I've got a space. I do not recommend spaces. Okay. It's possible to derive, this is, this one is on the web page, this one is on the Canvas page. For example, invoice total, payment total, credit total. So the amount due would be the invoice total minus the sum of the payment total plus the credit total. Does that make sense? You could have also gotten rid of the parentheses and put a minus sign in there. All of your math stuff applies. Questions on that? Yes? I'm going to do a query that makes it up, yes. Checking.
The main question I'm trying to ask was, is it possible when you're naming fields, you do like name, ID, is it possible to say invoice total equals this amount?
Not in the name. You have to say select the field name. Now, if you say as and give it a new name, that's legal, but you can't say select invoice total greater than 22. Okay, you have to say select invoice total from invoices where invoice total is greater than 22. So that has to go in the where clause. So the select is just, you're just telling it which fields to select. It doesn't do any further processing there, with one exception here. Amount due, will you agree with this amount due? Invoice total minus the sum of the payment total plus the credit total. Make sense? I'm going to assume it does. Select invoice number. Now, do that calculation in the query. Do the calculation. give it a new name. Here, we have to have a new name for it. Do we have to? Well, no. But if I don't put a new name there, the column will have no name. And therefore, it is very difficult to deal with it later. So I will always, when I have a derived query like this, when I'm doing a calculation, I will always rename the column. Question? So this is calculating the amount due and giving it a name. It is possible to skip the word AS. If you just put space amount due, it will work in SQL. Dr. Smith is going to have a problem with it. From invoices, it's coming from the invoices. Now, if I want to run this, notice that I see amount due. Most of them are 0. I could order by amount due. Questions? Okay. Notice that most of those are 0. I'm not interested in zeros. I want to see those that have a greater than 0 amount due. I want to say this. Select invoice number, invoice total. Let me that's typically the way I will do it when, so I'll break the line when it wraps off the page typically. I can break a line any place I want to. I'll usually break it at a comma. I try to break it where it makes sense and reads well. So I'm fussing over trying to make it readable, not where do I have to break it, but that's where I probably will. Okay, so here is my invoice total. Total minus the payment minus the credit. If I'd put a minus sign here and lost these parentheses, it would have been just fine. Would have been exactly the same thing. I give it a name. Amount due. From invoices where amount due is greater than 0. Does that make sense to you? It makes sense to me. I would think that would work. So why am I getting a bunch of error message for my reading pleasure? Well, in some products, by the way, it will work. Most of the time it won't. SQL, typically it won't. And the reason for it, when you want to get greater than 0, you have to, let me see if I can break this off. Comma, enter, tab. Okay. If I write it like this, it will work. Now I only see them where it's greater than 0. But I have to say it again. On the other hand, if I put amount due in the order by line, it will work. So this, even though in the where clause, I have to write this thing again. So in the where clause, I have to copy and paste this. But I can say order by, and I can use it in the order by line. It would also work if you copied and pasted it, by the way. The reason for this is the order that they are evaluated in. And you're used to a computer programming language if you've programmed. Most of you have programmed in some language. something, Java, C, Python, something like that. All of your stuff is executed in order. Guess what? That just went out the window in SQL. It no longer works that way. In SQL, when it executes a select from where query, the first thing that it executes is the from line. What tables? So it goes out and gets the tables. The second thing it does, it goes through the tables and pulls out the rows it wants, all of the rows. This is why it doesn't cost you any more to return extra stuff from a row. It goes out and it gets the rows that it needs. Then the third thing it does, it goes through it and it decides which of those fields to return, and that is when the columns get renamed. So until that third step happens, that name that you put on that column doesn't exist. And finally, the last thing that happens is the order by. And this is why if I say this, I say where, I have to retype it or copy and paste. Usually I copy and paste, okay? If I don't do that, I'll get an error. But when I get to the order by, because the order by comes after the select, this will work. Now, if you just say, hey, anytime I have a calculation, I'm going to copy and paste the calculation, that's fine. It won't hurt anything. SQL is a highly optimized language. SQL will take care of itself. It is difficult to write SQL code that is inefficient. I'm going to show you some ways to make it more efficient. You can write SQL that is inefficient. For the most part, just because you copy and paste a calculation doesn't mean it's going to do it twice. It just means it doesn't have that name yet. Questions on this one? I think we're about done. It's about 7:30. Questions? Okay, the assignment then, I guess what I'll do, I like making the assignments all due the same day, and I was just, or by default, making them due at the end of Thursday. I can make them due end of Friday just as well, or Saturday if you prefer that. The due date is not particularly important to me. The reason I said Thursday is probably because I'll grade on the train on Friday as I'm going over to Plano. But it's, if you're a day or two late turning it in, it's not even late. I don't consider that late. You know, if you're 3 weeks late, that's late. On the other hand, if you take an extra day or two, don't worry about it. I'll grade it and get it back to you. Probably after about a week, certainly after about 2 weeks, what I'll do is I'll turn off the notifications for when somebody new submits an assignment, and I'll just let them stack up until I get a bunch of them to grade. It's just difficult to have to go back and grade one assignment. Not difficult, I don't have to keep track of it, so I'll just let Canvas keep track of it. And I will grade it. So if you turn in an assignment that's 3 weeks late, okay, don't worry about it, but don't bug me on when I'm going to grade it. I'll grade it when I get to it. What is it? So Module 5, I believe I will go ahead and make due next Thursday night. If you do it on Friday, Saturday, that's fine. So due just means, yeah, it's due. What else was I going to say tonight? I believe that's about it. Do I have any questions from Internet land? If you have a question, my participants out there, Have any questions? Okay, I've unmuted a couple, unless your mic is turned off at your end. I have my headset on, and you may ask a question.
No questions here.
Very well. Well, I'm glad to hear from you guys anyway. I'm going to go back and mute. If you have a question and don't have a microphone, that's fine. You don't have to have a microphone. Just send me a you can send me a message to the inbox, and I'll try to keep an eye on it. And that'll I will be conducting a lab. I'm going to go ahead and keep the meeting active for a few minutes. So if you have a question, you can send me a Canvas message and I'll see it. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording at this time. It is 7:33, and the recording will now end. I say it will.